Uh, Hello, listeners. Welcome to T Boy Swag, to our interviews series with different cool trans artists. I'm DJ Pissboy, of course, and I'm so excited to welcome my special guest. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm DJ Flowerboy, also known as Fa. I use they, them, he, him pronouns. I am a media arts MFA student at UCLA. Yeah, and I make games and weird websites that I somehow call games, and I also make some manifestos here and there.
I love it. Oh my gosh. I really loved the if you I'm gonna be linking pause stuff when I post this. So if you're listening right now, go check it out. Um but I was really curious of like what do you think like do you think like games and like interactive media have like an inherent transness to them, or at least how you're approaching it? Because like a lot of the stuff you're um like when you're talking about your craft, I guess, on your site or like on itch, it's very like transcentric but also like decolonial, and I was kind of curious as to like what is your own kind of craft, like you write manifestos, what's your own kind of like manifesto to yourself,
So,
if you
like an
have
artist
any.
statement.
Yeah, an artist statement, I don't know. It's just like I don't know. Yeah, like what where do you think you're kind of coming from for all of these? Because they're also like they're all different. They're not all just about queerness or transness. You have a really cool like aquarium walkthrough. I thought that was so cute. Like it's just so pleasant. Like and I was just curious.
Yeah, I mean to answer your sort of first part of the question about whether games inherently have a transness to them. I don't know if they inherently have it, but in relation to sort of like gamer culture, I feel like it is very sort of rooted in this sort of masculine sort of energy. Not just like, oh, it's like gamer bros and all that. It's also like games came from, uh, I guess, they have a sort of like military sort of background. So like it does kind of feel that way, and therefore like I think my work and I think a lot of uh, artists work where like they're approaching games in this sort of uh, like trying to push the boundaries of what games could be, and for some they're kind of just focused in this sort of game realm, but like sort of questioning the form of games or whatever. But like I think for me, I'm kind of like somewhere at the intersection of games and research, but also personal history. So it's like kind of that sort of Venn diagram of interests. Um, and what was your? I guess that kind of answers your question, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. I'm sorry, my questions get a little
No, no.
I lose the fall a little bit. That's really interesting of how you're kind of saying that you're kind of approaching your craft as like both as like game making, but also research and then personal kind of almost meditation or like history. Um, how like when it comes to the research aspect, what type of like research do interest you? Is it more like kind of like on like a scientific level or more in like a socio historical level, because like both are really interesting, like applying both of those games separately like are very fascinating to me, so I'm really curious.
Yeah. I think I'm interested in maybe sort of historical research, not as in not maybe not exclusively like, oh, like what happened in the past. It's also like trying to record the present moment as a sort of like oral historical artifact. Yeah, I think I'm really inspired by, I guess, the idea of oral histories as not something that can be sort of removed from bias, but sort of embracing that bias as a way to kind of see a specific perspective of maybe a larger sort of form of existence, maybe.
That's really beautiful. It's kind of like each like oral history kind of as like little fragments of a mosaic that all kind of fit together. They're all still unique, separate, and pieces and lenses to look at it. That's really beautiful. Yeah, I remember I've read like this essay about like games as zines. Like there's like a book about it, like games as zines, and
And
you're
entropy?
yeah, in Anthropy. And I was as I was looking at your work, it very even what like I think one of your products is a zine. It's a actual zine because I know you gave it to me. And then I saw it on your itch, and I was like, wait a second, that's so cool.
Uh,
And I guess like, do you kind of consider zines as like, even though they're kind of written histories, do they kind of have that same sort of like ephemeralness to them? And how does that kind of fit with games?
hmm.
Like, like if the concept of like looking at games as zines,
Games as zines. Hmm.
and then zines as their own kind of ephemeral, almost
Hmm.
uncurated liminal history.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how to sort of make the link between sort of games and zines, but I do think that zines are, I guess, a playful way of understanding, uh, I guess, historical records.
Hmm.
Um, because a lot of the zines that I like, uh, or like, I'm actually not too picky about what zines I collect. I just really like, I guess, having this sort of like easily distributable and producible sort of historical record as like a record of people's ideas or people's sort of craft. And yeah, I think that's just something that I really respect. And um, yeah, I feel like they should be as valid a craft as like any other sort of practice.
I apologize for coughing.
No, so sorry about, yeah.
Yeah, listeners, just fair warning. If I cough throughout this, I have COVID, so I apologize. I like drank a little Gatorade and it went down the wrong pipe. I think like yeah, zines kind of have like a little like there's snapshots of like a specific moment when that like creator made it. Like so many of my zines are kind of made in like the fit of the moment, and then like it's like I couldn't create it now, not because it's like, oh, this is genius. It's like, no, this is deranged. It's deranged from like a couple months ago. Like I'm in a better headspace now. I'm in a different headspace. Um, I guess one question I have is for your craft, it's very unique type of craft to be doing like a lot of interactive digital art that's like both websites to interactive manifestos to games and then just like interactive experiences. And I was curious of why that medium.
Hmm. Um, well, I will say that I'm not particular about the medium that I use. It just happened to be. Like I'm not like, oh, I'm exclusively a website maker or I exclusively make digital works, but it just kind of turned out that way. So for some reason, but I guess when I'm thinking about distribution and also, I guess, my own experiences of queerness where like I came from a place where I couldn't afford to be open about my expression uh, and identity in person. And so a lot of the way I encountered queerness was through the internet. And so like that kind of became why a website became such like an appropriate sort of medium to like explore this through. And I guess for me, I'm very curious about this question of what it means to sort of position myself as like a creator of interactive systems, where like I'm anticipating someone else to kind of engage with it, and like what is that relationship? What is the relationship between the system and the person engaging with it? What is my relationship to that person engaging with it? That's kind of a question that I'm always interested in. And I still don't know the answer most of the time. Like I don't even know what I'm doing most of the time, but like somehow these are sort of just points of considerations that like always bring me back to like games as an interesting medium to explore, I guess.
Yeah, I can really relate with that. I think the levels in which you like other people can interact with your work are incomparable to any other medium, because there's someone physically like interact, or like kind of not either physically or just on like kind of an emotion level interacting with everything you're creating. And so there's so much intention of what reactions each part should elicit. That's really, really interesting. I guess I'm wondering, where did you kind of start your art practice, I guess? Or it was like kind of website design and like HTML kind of like a first little place to start? Or were you like more of a traditional artist before this?
I when I was applying to colleges, I thought I was gonna go into animation, and I ended up in UCLA. I ended up in UCLA for trans health related reasons, and but yeah, I think I didn't really anticipate my practice going in, like for it to go into games or like website creation. Um, and so like I feel like I would say I'm making these things sort of amateurly, although I'm trying to sort of like be better at it, formally speaking. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that's really good, like a really cool way of approaching of it. And even that like kind of humility of like kind of like, oh, I'm just doing, I just started doing this and I'm
Yeah.
having a good time.
Yeah. My first game was the first game that I tried to make was in this class called Drawing and Color, which had nothing to do with games. So like it was just like an impulse that kind of just continued carrying me through. So
Wow. I think like it was just like you just kind of found your way back into games, like for just kind of like going in. That's really cool. I think like, yeah, I've entered UCLA in film and stuff for writing. I think like I just kind of found my way over here just haphazardly. Like,
because you were in the print lab too long and like, you just had to take one.
yeah, I guess I was in the print lab for too long. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. For me, I think I applied to NYU for games, but then it was so expensive. And then I ended up at UCLA. It was like ridiculous. It was ridiculous amount of money.
Jeez.
Where do you kind of see your craft going? I know that's like such a big question. Like it's just like, oh fuck if I know. I'm just kind of vibing. But what are like some things like you either haven't really explored or like are wanting to explore that you're like looking forward to like figuring out?
I'm actually curious about so like I've been thinking about sort of my ideal way of making and sharing art, uh, as a like for my own practice and beyond sort of like school, I guess. I do think I would like to make and share art without having my name attached to anything. I think that's kind of my ideal way of practicing whatever I do. And I know that's difficult under an institutional context where like my name is kind of everywhere and people know me. Um, but yeah, I think that's kind of something I'm excited about after school. And of course, I am interested in sort of like a pedagogical practice. Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. For you, what is like the appeal of the anonymity? Because I can really understand on my end, but I'm really curious is like what is the appeal of anonymity to your art as like a distribution?
I guess um, I think the art that I want to do is, I guess, like it's more explicit and like not afraid to go into sort of more, I guess, taboo or like very sort of niche subcultural sort of uh, themes. But I think right now I'm kind of, I guess I'm concerned about one would be safety, and also two would be, I guess, I feel embarrassed to like like kind of like go into that end of like the spectrum, but I also feel responsible, I guess. Like the one thing holding me back is sort of like anonymity. Sort of could remove me from like accountability, which I think is still somewhat important. But it's kind of like I guess, a dilemma of mine. You know.
Yeah. I think like anonymity, especially as it relates to queerness, and like especially like how you kind of entered queerness on an online way, and your craft is like very website based, online, digital. Like I feel like that's something like at least kind of going into like more modern day, like current day, like anonymity online is kind of something of yesteryear. I think that's really interesting, I guess, kind of how it relates to your art, kind of it parallels that of like, it's like not like the anonymity is kind of comforting, at least online. Like, at least like for me, like even on some stuff, like I may have some things that are real about me on, like for instance, Tumblr, but it's borderline anonymous. They don't know anything about me.
Yeah.
Like maybe like a few of my mutuals know more about me because we've talked on like DMs before, but that's about it.
Yeah, and I think it also like I guess is it would be a full embrace of like what I enjoy about the internet, and how I guess like if we think about, let's say, queerness as something that is prosecuted or like is always sort of like uh, surveilled, I suppose. And I feel like it that anonymity kind of make helps provide like both a safety net, but also like it's a freedom from like it's like a freedom from, I guess, larger state surveillance maybe. and and if I think about like subcultural sort of practices of like, let's say, fan cultures that um, can go into many sort of like depths of like, oh, like kinks or like fan fiction or whatever, it's always sort of like a group of anonymous people who like share a common sort of interest, but like are connected through these interests, but like still don't know anything about each other. And I think to make work about that kind of I guess necessitates a sort of like contextual practice of like, oh, like kind of embracing the idea of being anonymous, I guess, as opposed to like having that sort of direct connection between like a digital presence and a physical presence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really succinct and beautiful way of putting it. I like like now that I'm thinking about it, so much of like I guess internet gathering, especially around specific topics, is so built around anonymity. Even when people are like forthcoming about maybe like even their name, like you still don't know a single thing about them besides their name and the fact that they make this thing about this thing. And then maybe you know what country they're from, but that's about it. There could be a million people in that country with that same name.
Yeah.
So there's kind of like there's a sincerity in being anonymous.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And also like I guess the safety net of like kind of being in the masses and not being sort of identified or like isolated out of like that's the other thing I enjoy about it.
Yeah, it's like safety both from like state surveillance and like other like issues of security, and then also it's like kind of own personal security of like even if you're like embarrassed about something. Like I've been that person. Like I have like this one fandom I was part of. I was embarrassed to be part of this fandom. So everything I did was under like my pseudonym. Like I just used my username and everybody called me by that. And then like they knew my like name if they actually talked to me, but like for all considerations online of the things I created, they just know me as this and the things that I've created. Kind of a nice like epitaph of like, this is who I am, this is what I've made.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it also speaks to, I guess, the possibility of, I guess, like there's this like beautiful sort of fluidity of like transitioning across multiple personas, which I think happens in real life too. But like, yeah, I think it's a bit more. I don't know what the word for it is, but like, I guess the distinction is a bit clearer online. Where like, oh, this is my handle for this purpose, and this is my handle for this other purpose. Like, whereas like kind of when we engage like in sort of like a physical sort of space, it kind of those sort of crossovers are very common, where like it kind of becomes a bit blurred. But I think that's the other thing I like about it, I guess.
Yeah, like when you're talking to people, like you may talk to this person differently than you talk to this person. Or
yeah, they know you for different things.
Yeah. Like there's so many people in my life where I'm just like, oh, like I know you through this, and this is my main frame of reference to know you. Like I know you through the game lab. Like we know each other because we both like weird games and stuff, and we're at UCLA, and that's like our common point. But then everyone has like a life outside of this point that influences that, but it's still like there's that point of connection that's still so sincere in that. I think that's like, yeah, it's a really interesting way of looking at I've never thought this much about depth of anonymity, but I'm so happy that you shared your thoughts with me.
Yeah, of course.
All right, we're gonna have a little bit of a music break with some music that Hua, my beloved DJ fanboy, curated, and we'll be right back.
ってみせたねえ愛したいこれは真実ただ愛されたいのは不誠実もうどうすればいいどうすればいいのかってわからないよその頭の中がわかんないでも愛想はいいと数えないよこうやってまた君のペースに飲まれてくそうやってまたほら振り回されてる傷つかないように鍵をかけた扉にもたれて眠りにつく変われないのは変わらないからそんなことは分かってるけどもう何も失いたくなくて大切なものが増えることに怯えていた情けない僕を笑い飛ばしてくれさあ愛し愛されてこうぜもうバカなふりしていようぜまあどうにかなるさどうにでもなるだろう思うがままに今夜会いに行ければいいかいいや大した話じゃないよこれが愛なのか確かめさせてくれこれからも先に振り回してくれいつまでも先に振り回してくれ現る黒い空鼓動笑い目を繰り返す嵐が来る前に今宵はあの歌を授けましょうmahali yuwale gaye sabanale amale dirahi jumagi gano shana mahali yuwale gaye sabanale amale dirahi jumagi gano shana lagi cuma kita salah memahami karena salah nale.
Hey, welcome back, listeners. I'm back with DJ Flowerboy to discuss more of their craft and their wizardry. I guess for a lot of your work it's both queer, but there's also like stuff that isn't queer. Where do you kind of like find like how much like where do you kind of find yourself in your craft? And it's like kind of is each work kind of like a facet of you in a way, or are you like how does your personal like point of view and experience like influence your work? Because it seems like it's very interconnected, as you like even previously stated, your personal history is tied deeply to your work.
Yeah. Yeah, so like definitely a lot of the work that I do kind of stems from my own experience in some way. And so like there's like a lot of queer rage going on. And then there's also like another side, which is like maybe not necessarily related to like my own queerness, but exploring a different aspect of my life. So like Aquarium Visit was created I guess because I enjoy aquariums. They're kind of a very nice place to just sit, and for me, I like to draw when I visit these places, or like at least take photos so that I can draw them later. And yeah, so like that kind of work came out when the pandemic just started, and that was the last aquarium I visited. It was the Berlin Aquarium. And so I was just like, yeah, this was just like, I guess, like a therapeutic activity maybe to just get this out of the way. And yeah, and then there's also like Spore Archive, which is not on my itch page, but like is a website that I made sort of trying to experiment with photogrammetry technology, where like I was screen recording the environment of like my playthrough of Spore, the EA game, and trying to sort of run that through the photogrammetry software and seeing what comes out of it. And also like it was, I guess, my own way of trying to reclaim my own data when like a lot of it is now inaccessible because of the way they've changed their distribution of the game, where at first it was like CDs, and now it's kind of like all, I guess, organized within this sort of like digital store sort of like systems where like it's a bit more obscure, I guess, or hard to access. Yeah. So I guess my answer to that is, yeah, it's like more of like facets of my own interests, I guess, or experiences, rather than like, oh, this is one primary concern that I'm like working around. Yeah.
I think that's really cool. And I really like kind of like, even with the aquarium and the sports stuff, there's like a kind of air of whimsy to those, where it's just kind of like, I like aquariums and like playing sport. I completely forgot about the EA store thing. Like how after a certain point, like every game company tried to make their own Steam store. And it's really fascinating, at least kind of going back and looking at games of how there's some games like the one that comes to mind first is like Final Fantasy. I'm a huge Final Fantasy person. And I remember 13 came on 3 discs. And you had to change out the discs the further you progressed in the game. And it's so crazy to think about like, oh, like I can just download that game now on my computer and play it. But also I miss the kind of like fragility of having all those discs, and then kind of like having it as a tangible thing to like have, even like kind of like knowing like, oh yeah, like this is my game, like I've played through this amount. I've played to disc 2. I haven't touched disc 3. Disc 3 is untouched. I guess one question, this is kind of a weird one. How do you kind of see, you've talked about zines as kind of, you collect zines just kind of as like they're like living documents of like a certain person's voice in a certain moment, right? But how do you view physical creations kind of like as a primarily digital artist, and how to like, would you view even like making physical tangible art media based off of your own work, as like for instance like the aquarium, if you were to make like something out of that, like as a project, even if it was like a projection mapped instead of it in a game engine, a projection mapped in like an actual space, how, like, what is your view on that, and how does it like, what effect, how does your view on that like affect how you view your art as a whole?
Oh, I mean, I guess in some ways, as a digital artist, making tangible work becomes something that I view more preciously now, and I do enjoy it. I used to go to anime conventions and make all sorts of fan merch, and that was really nice. And yeah, I don't know. In some ways, I feel like the reason why I go to digital works is because I can't afford the materials to make tangible works. Or like when I do, they're kind of made amateurly or like cheaply, like zines, or like I like to make handmade stickers as well. And so, yeah, I guess. But like, I feel like the example that you gave of like the projection mapping, that kind of still has some sort of digitality to it, where like it doesn't take up a tangible space. It just like projects the screen larger in a three-dimensional setting. But I don't think I would consider that a tangible piece. You were saying?
Oh, I was just saying, yeah. I like, as I was like giving that example, I was like, this isn't tangible, but like I was thinking, like as I was saying, I was like, this isn't tangible, but
yeah, but I mean, definitely there are different affordances of like the digital and like the tangible, I guess, or like the non-digital.
Yeah.
And I think I go to these modes, like I switch between modes according to like what I'm trying to achieve. Like right now I'm working on my solo show. I'm making a digital work about the movement of, I guess, objects, and how that kind of relates, like objects as in like traded goods, and how that kind of relates to the movement of peoples, the movement of cultures, and even personal memories. And also like having that being like a question of what tradition or culture really is, when like it's so tied to like market forces and capitalism. And so like right now I'm making like a simulation, not simulation, maybe like a game run by NPC, so like a non-playable game that kind of runs on its own. And it's kind of like trying to simulate that sort of movement and engagement with like traded goods, where like goods are transported to a certain destination, they are purchased, they are consumed, and what is left is the shell of the good, which is like what people call trash. And then that trash also gets transported, whether through to the ocean, or like landfills, or like even sometimes back to where they were manufactured, sort of like the place where they were manufactured, but sort of left to decompose or whatever. Yeah, that's kind of one aspect of it, but like on the other end, I've also been collecting a lot of my own trash and also trash from other friends who are also international students from where I came from. And so I'm also thinking of introducing a tangible aspect to it and kind of finding ways to use that sort of medium to engage with this topic, and also bringing participants in, like participants as in people encountering the work, and trying to, like, I guess, understand that their relationship to this work as well through tangible means. Yeah, does that make sense? I went on a rant.
No, that's really cool. I was like, I remember seeing you putting like gluing trash on cardboard a couple weeks ago, and I was like,
what the fuck?
I was like watching that, and I was just like, I feel like there'll be answers someday about that. Now there's
and that's when you invited me to the show.
Yeah. That's really, really cool, and it's really interesting, like kind of critique of like global capitalism as kind of it exists as like kind of a post-colonial thing, like a remnant of colonialism of like so my mom grew up in Hawaii, and there's already a lot going on there. Like I was just saying, like, oh yeah, she's like white from Hawaii. I'm like, it's complicated. 23andMe. Let's just broadening futures, apparently in part Polynesian. But there's like a whole like a lot of like kind of consumer goods in both in like kind of Polynesia and throughout like South Pacific like area. It's really interesting kind of looking at them versus how in mainland America, because there's like a whole like thing about like trash and disposal, because like a lot of people just just throw it in the ocean, but then like the ocean water moves. Like,
it's the same ocean.
It's the same ocean. But also like kind of with how different goods people consume of like in like for instance with like Hawaiian stuff, like Hawaii is like technically a state of the United States with debatable want. But it like some of the food is very based on like kind of post-war, pre-war ration stuff. Like Spam is a big one of that, is an advent of war and military what do you call it, occupation. And so it was like corned beef is also one. There's a lot of like these meats, especially in Vienna sausages. Like these are three meats you would not expect to be like popular in like a Polynesian region or in like a very diasporic Asian region. But it's so fundamental to the food. And I feel like it's kind of it like a lot of the trash we excrete. That sounds so bad. A lot of the like things we consume and the stuff that gets produced after we consume it, of like the trash of remnants of like stuff, is like it says nothing, but it also says a lot at the same time. You know, it's like, oh, this person ate a lot of that, but then there's also like a context of why they would eat that or why they would consume that.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I guess like having that sort of product, like what you mentioned was very interesting about like, oh, this food is very popular because it came from like the military times or whatever. And like, in some sense, it's also like a blurring of like what exactly constitutes an identity. Like if we go into this like very sort of essentialist sort of rabbit hole of like I guess stuff that represents let's say Hawaii, right? But like that meat came from somewhere else, but like somehow it coalesced with like, oh, this is kind of food that people here associate with as like part of their upbringing or like their daily livelihoods. And so like I guess there is also that question that I'm trying to ask, where like back home in Malaysia and Singapore, there's this brand of like chocolate malt drink called Milo.
Oh my god, Milo.
Yeah, Milo. Yeah. and like it's so associated with like let's say sports day or whatever, where like there's like Milo trucks or whatever that like dispense cups of Milo for people to drink. But like you realize that I guess that sort of company that produces these things, like Milo comes from like I think it's like Australian. So like yeah, I think it's an Australian brand. So I mean it's by Nestle, but like I think Milo is specifically from Australia.
Yeah,
so,
it's originally developed in Australia.
Yeah, and like it's like, where did that come from?
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in this, where like it's not just, I guess, local products being considered local, but also like I guess yeah, I guess it's a question about what identity really means, or like what sort of factors go into like this sort of building this sort of imagined community, and what are the falsehoods of that sort of essentialized sort of like identity, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's also so interesting of like with like we kind of view like at least like a lot of I would say Western like perspectives view like so much of like, oh well, these places are now countries that have like their own like freedom and independence to do whatever they like. But so much of like the capitalist consumerist like remnants so like or like are that colonial aspect of them. Even when I just think about like how American culture can just be kind of described as like very based in consumer goods and that essentialist thing of like it's all like, oh, Kellogg,
Kroger.
Yeah, like it's all of these things that have like it's like even Gatorade. Like Gatorade comes from like Florida, from I think like Florida State or something like that, because they that's where they developed it. But and then seeing that residually like throughout the rest of like kind of what would be deemed the global South, because I know like Milo is kind of popular in Latin America because like I know it through my grandma because she's Colombian. Like I've had Milo with my Colombian family, so it was like kind of like it's kind of crazy to hear like from like Malaysia. It's like, oh, Milo's a big thing there too. And I'm like, oh wait, I love Milo. What do you mean?
It's our Milo.
It's all Milo. And I was like looking on the wiki, and it's like talking about how it's like it's very populated regions and basically kind of like Southeast Asia and Africa and South America, which pretty much is in like pretty much like the global South, like Southeast and West Asia, Africa, and Latin America, which is really crazy. Yeah. There's energy bars. Oh my god.
They have this thing called Milo Nuggets, and it's like basically like tiny Kit Kat bite versions of Milo, which is really yummy.
Oh, that looks yummy.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Wow.
Anyways.
Okay, anyways, we're getting really, really sidetracked by Milo.
But I mean, to sort of like give a disclaimer, like a lot of these interests definitely stem from like my own observations, and like I'm not like a researcher, like I'm not a professional researcher in like movement of products or like trash distribution or whatever. But I think there is something worth discussing just based from an, I guess, like an observer's point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess one question I have is kind of going back to your first talking about it, like this is for your solo show. What is kind of, is there like a topic for your solo show? Like, is there, or is it just a bunch of your
free,
work?
yeah, it's free real estate.
Real estate.
Free real estate. We get the grad gallery to ourselves for a while, like maybe 3 days, excluding installation. Yeah, so yeah, it's whatever. Yeah.
It's whatever. It's just a solo show.
No, seriously, it really doesn't matter that much. I'm like, I don't even know how many people are coming. Like, probably very few.
Well, just wait until we blast it on T-Voice Pack.
Yeah.
All the trans peeps are gonna roll up.
Yeah.
I guess when is your solo show?
Let me check the calendar. I think it's gonna be March. I want to say March 7th and 9th.
Okay.
March 7th to March 9th.
March 7th, March 9th. Okay.
Yeah, in the EDA.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to
Week
put this.
9.
Week 9.
Week 9.
Oh gosh. After I have to like figure out like the month of March is like hell a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm so excited
Oh, thank you.
to look at your stuff.
I hope there's stuff to look at.
Gosh. I guess so you were like when I saw you pasting the stuff on the board, is that trash like are you gonna be like scanning it and importing it into things, or is it gonna be physically installed?
I don't know if I have time for a physical installation for my solo show, but at least like the non-playable game will be a projection on the wall. That's kind of, and like if I do want to sort of include another aspect to it, it would probably just be like a table filled with trash I've collected just as is, as like part of behind the scenes research sort of thing. But, I haven't really figured out the details of the sort of interactive physical element yet, which I probably need more time for. Anyways. Yeah.
That's so cool. I'm wondering what kind of do you find yourself influenced by for your work?
Well, I guess like the one big project that I keep going back to is Zoyander Street's Trans People in Japan. I think it's called Interactive Portraits Trans People in Japan, which is on itch. And I think playing that game kind of made me realize the greater possibilities for games. Not to say that games should be anything greater than they already are. It's just that I never thought that games and research could coincide in that way. Like it was a brand new take on games and brand new take on research for me, which kind of like inspired me to sort of go down this sort of like rabbit hole of like, oh, it's games, but also research. And yeah, it's like, and Zoyander Street does I guess for their practice, they do a really good job at like unpacking what their role is as a sort of historical practitioner. Just basically question. I guess understanding the ethics of and also the problems of traditional historical research, where it's usually like old white men going to like cultures they don't belong to and pointing their fingers and being like, oh, I think this happened, and that kind of makes it into the history books. It's like, yeah, I guess like that's kind of what I'm really interested in as like a researcher of like how do we what are alternatives to this practice, and how can games sort of facilitate that?
Yeah, a lot of like what this game and then like a lot of what you've talked about like with your research kind of reminds me of a lot of like archival practice.
Oh,
like it's like a lot of, I love archives so much, so I'm really want to play this game now, and it's kind of really interesting, at least even thinking about this kind of archival research practitioner kind of role of like of your art and of Xander Street's art. And kind of like even with T-Boy Swag, it's kind of a similar case where it's like it's kind of just meant to be like a living archive of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's, I think it's really interesting of when, because so much of like, especially like queer identities, but especially like with like non-white queer identities and like non-like kind of waspy queer identities, like the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, like Americana, they like the narrative is kind of like unwritten there, or if it is written, it's like kind of wrong or vague. So it's really interesting to kind of like be kind of what do you call it? It starts with an R. It's kind of not retrospective, but like revisionist with it, of like, actually no, or actually this, actually this.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the realm of like queer history, that is so true. Where like, oh gosh, I mean, I went on a rant in my most recent manifesto, Queer Degenerates Forever, where it's like right now the reason why like so much of, I guess, queer vocabulary that is used not just in Euro-American sort of like context, but also like in like where I'm from, or like in other spaces, it's kind of a lot of it is a lot of their vocabulary is derived from, I guess, Anglo-centric sort of perspectives of sexuality and gender. Like a lot of it is like translations from like the LGBTQIA sort of acronyms and identities, but like queerness has existed even beyond these sort of like contexts. It's just that so much of it has lost. For my own sort of like background specifically, both like Malaysia and Singapore were British colonial states, and we had this like we inherited this like colonial law that basically criminalized homosexuality, or like quote unquote carnal sexual acts that go against carnal sexual intercourse that goes against like the order of nature, which can mean a lot of things. And what like what I'm trying to say is, I'm kind of blanking out here. It's yeah, and now like our sort of conservative sort of governmental states have been using this sort of like rhetoric to like be like, oh, we are normal people. We in our traditional Asian values, we do not condone queerness because it is a Western import, and that's just sad to see because all of our queer archives, or like if like I don't even like if there were any queer archives, it has been lost. If there were any sort of like queer physical spaces that had history, that has been gentrified, and yeah, it's just sad to see, which is why I think like archiving is just like I wish it didn't have to be so like extractivist, or like I wish people can just be left alone, you know, and like it's like if you don't, it's hard not to do when like people have been sort of like parading their own sort of homophobic rhetorics and claiming that is fact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. I guess I'm kind of like you've talked about like a lot about you're like interested in research and pedagogy, but a lot of your background is in art, I guess, of like where does like your interest in like kind of research like come from, I guess, because I don't like I have like several like art, like most of my friends in art, they'll be like, oh, like I did some research for like doing concept art, but that's about as far as it goes. But yours is much more deeper into like how you're consider like both the topic and what you're talking about and all the consideration, and also in the consideration of what you're making and how you make it. So I'm just curious as to where you kind of got that like want to tell stories or make art in that specific way.
I guess in some ways, I guess like for me, I kind of find myself existing at the intersections of like nationality and even ethnic identity and also sexuality, gender. And so like because of this sort of like weird in between spot I'm in, I kind of find research as to be a way to like make connections between my own personal experiences in the larger picture, but also not in a way that sort of is dictating, oh, this is how everyone who has been through, everyone who like exists at this intersection experiences this. It's not in that way at all. It's more of like a just shining a spotlight on my own perspective specifically, but also not it being sort of like exclusionary, but more of like, oh, maybe this larger picture can explain why I'm experiencing this. And so that's kind of my take on research, and like that's kind of what I'm most interested in. And I guess in that way, it necessitates sort of looking at bigger pictures. And maybe that's kind of why I consider my own practice to be research-based. Yeah.
Do you have any last statements, thoughts, last words?
Last words. Oh no.
Ominous.
Stay hydrated, stretch, go for a walk, touch grass. Yes.
Don't cook suspicious salmon.
Don't cook suspicious salmon. Never ever. Don't trust it. Do not trust the fish.
Do not trust the fish. All right, listeners. Well, I'm going to be linking Oloha's stuff in my little link tree and in the description of stuff. You'll see it. And I'll be tagging Wall, like, go check their stuff out. And if you're at UCLA, make sure to keep an eye out for their show. I'll be posting his like once like there's like a date, and like if you make any like promo posts, I will be reposting, or I'll just be like, you tell me like, oh, it's opening it on the 7th at this time, then I'll be like, oh, okay,
March 7th, 5 p.m.
March 7th, 5 p.m. Trust, I will be the hype beast for this.
Ayo, thank you.
Yeah. All right. I feel like that was a great advice. The last word, stay hydrated. Definitely stay hydrated. You know what? Drink a nice, crisp, cold Gatorade. That's always delicious. Or if you're not feeling Gatorade, have a Coca-Cola. A nice cold Coca-Cola. It's also delicious. And tune in next week for another interview with another cool artist. And have a great week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wait, where's there it is.